I'm Leon Morris. I'm the president of Pardes, and it's a real pleasure to welcome all of you here tonight and to really celebrate these two important works that have emerged over the last few months. Shiva, Poems of October 7th, and Az Nashir, We Will Sing Again, Women's Prayers for Our Time of Need. And to be here this evening with Rachel Korazim and Rachel Sharansky Danziger, the editors and translators of these two important works. I want to begin, this program was conceived of and executed by our colleague, Deborah Wiener-Solomon. And as many of you know, Deborah's son, Eitan, was wounded in battle a week ago, 10 days ago. And I want to begin just by offering that all of our learning and all of our intentions tonight should be for the refuah of Eitan ben Devorah, and that Eitan should experience, together with all the other soldiers who are injured and recovering, a refuah shlema. On your seats are some information both about our continuing education offerings at Pardes. Many of you take advantage of those either online or in person. And I believe there's also some information about our Pardes Learning Seminar, or there will be afterwards. We have a winter learning seminar that's online the weekend of President's Day, if that means anything to anyone here who might be visiting, in January. And it's in person on a different theme the first week in July. So we'd love for you to consider being with us either online in January or in person in July. I want to thank Mona Fishbane, who is sponsoring both the video that I know so many people will appreciate, the video of this evening's program, as well as the refreshments. And thank you very much for making that possible. One of my favorite Talmudic sugyot is from Masechet Megillah, in which the rabbis want to know, how did Moshe Rabbeinu, how did Moses go from being someone who couldn't speak well to someone who was capable of reciting the entire book of Deuteronomy, of Devarim? And the answer that the rabbis give, this is in this is a form of it is in Masechet Megillah. It's more developed actually in Midrash Rabbah and Devarim Rabbah. The answer that's given is that Torah heals the tongue. And there's an obscure verse, one of those verses that in an English translation will have a little footnote, meaning of Hebrew uncertain. The strange use of the word trufah with a hey. And from the prophet Ezekiel, where it says that all kinds of trees in the days to come will grow for food on both banks of the stream, and their leaves will not wither, nor their fruit will fall. They'll yield new fruit every month. And then it says their fruit will serve for food and their leaves for healing. V'haya piryo lema'achal va'alehu litrufa. And litrufa, the rabbis wonder, this is a hapax legomenon, it's the only place that it occurs in the Hebrew Bible, and they wonder, what does this word mean, litrufa? And one is that, well, it's healing, like the Greek word therapion, therapy. But the rabbis use another method of interpretation in which they, called notarikon, in which they take the word litrufa, and they say litrufa, these leaves. Litrufa really means lahatir peh. It loosens the mouth. And they say that Torah, this tree, Torah can heal the mouth. It can cause someone who is unable to speak, somebody who's mute, and it can cure them of their muteness. And I kept thinking, as I've been sitting for several months now with both of these books, that this is something that both of you in your creative works have achieved, that the repeated refrain, and I believe you cite this in your introduction, Rachel Danziger, the repeated refrain after October 7th was Ein Milim. There are no words. And so you've kind of created evidence of the way in which words can be healing, in which poetry and prayer and teaching can help give us words, those of us who were made mute by what happened in October 7th, that we've found language. You provided us with language. So I want to ask you, just to get our conversation started, about this language. This was kind of untested language. Rachel, Korazim, you always teach poetry that's been published, that's out there, that might be unfamiliar to the classes that you're teaching. But this is fresh for both of you. These are fresh, kind of untested words. These were prayers that no one had ever recited before, and poetry that had never been published. These are texts in process. And I wondered, did that change your experience in dealing with this material? The fact that it was so new, the fact that we're still in the middle of the war. We don't know how this will all end exactly.
I'd like to invite you into the process of the Ein Milim, no words. On October 7th, I wasn't in Israel. My husband and I oftentimes, for personal reasons, spend the high holidays in Hungary. I wish I had the time to tell you why, but it works. And so when it hit, and sleep-deprived in front of screens, etc. And on the first Kabbalat Shabbat evening in Budapest, Yossi is asleep, 2 a.m. in the morning, and I don't know what to do with myself. And since many of my friends worldwide are rabbis, men and women, I decide to shul hop digitally. And I go visit Kabbalat Shabbat at a small shul, Central Synagogue of Manhattan, where my friend Rabbi Angela Buchdahl is going on the bima to start her drush for that first Shabbat after October 7th. Now, this is a huge Reform synagogue, and there are beautiful stuff I can say about Reform congregations. Knowledge of Hebrew is not one of them. And yet my friend Angela Buchdahl, who knows that better than I do, it's her congregation, goes on the bima that evening and starts in Ivrit. And she says, Ein Milim. You can find that drush on YouTube if you want. And I'm listening to her, and she's choking in New York, and I'm weeping in Budapest. And a few minutes into her Kabbalat Shabbat drasha that evening, I find myself arguing with her and saying, Angela, you probably have no words. I for sure have no words. But there are people out there who do. They're called poets, and I'll start looking for them. And this is what gets this started. Because but for one poet who is cited here, Michael Zak, I didn't know any of them. And I know how to teach poetry by reading the book and the learned articles and the PhD dissertations and the recorded lectures. But none of these poets, or most of them, were not yet published. No learned dissertations. But there is a huge advantage, Leon. You can send them a message on Facebook and they will respond. How I wish I could do that with Leah Goldberg.
You can send them a message on Facebook and they'll respond.
And they do, and you talk to them, and you have conversation. It's a totally different experience of learning and of teaching that comes out of that, knowing absolutely nothing about what the next step is. I was so smart that in the first semester I taught this, I gave the title for my sessions with a very elaborate, original title, Poems for Our Days. And then came the next semester, and I couldn't come up with anything better than More Poems for Our Days. This is where we are at. What do I know what is coming up tomorrow? I keep watching, collecting, recording, totally new experience.
I want to refer first to what you said, Rachel. It's very confusing, Rachel, but at least when I say Rachel, you can know I'm talking to you.
Yeah, but
Because no way I'm talking to myself.
Yeah.
But I want to refer to what you said before answering your question about this feeling of the eclipse of words and then trying to find the words and looking for the people who have the words. And to say that I relate to it greatly because to a great extent this is what we set out to do. And our process was a little different because other than one set of prayers written by Tamar Meir, all the prayers were prayers we solicited. We didn't even go looking for words that were already written. We led by Shir Lankin Sheps, who is the visionary behind this whole project, and myself and our partner, Ann Gordon, who unfortunately couldn't be here tonight. We went to people we felt or thought should have the words. And some of them told them, no, we really don't. And we said, really? Are you willing to sit with us and workshop with us and think with us and pray on it with us? Because we felt that their voice has something to offer that's important right now. So for us, it wasn't even words first. It was intention first. It was person first. And we asked them to write for us prayers for this time. And I think what was unique about doing it this way was that we got to eavesdrop and at times really partner in the creation process. And this was very special because we didn't get a text, we got a person. And we got a person with tears in their eyes and pain in their heart, because who doesn't have those things these days? And we got to sit there and watch how they themselves made the journey from the muteness of no words to finding words. And with every writer that we sat with, my experience was that it opened up a new path in my own soul. And, God was the first to overcome chaos with words, according to our tradition, right? God
makes order with words.
Goes into a place of chaos with words. We all do imitatio Dei now. We're all trying to find words in this new, unmade world, post-October 7th world. And I felt that there was something divine in each writer's process, and I'm very grateful that I got to witness that.
I want to ask you, how do you understand the difference between prayer and poetry, each of you, from your own perspectives? Often in a rabbinic sense, when I'm speaking to somebody who might be reluctant to pray inherited words, I'll speak about the Siddur, or the Machzor, being the book of poetry of the Jewish people. But how do you relate to this? You've defined your projects differently in that regard.
I would say now, at the end of at the end of this stage of putting the press together, we're still working with them, workshopping with them, etc. But I would say that to us, or I'll put it differently. When we started the process, I think Shira, Anne, and myself, and we started it after Pesach, after this last Pesach, I think we all thought we know what prayer is and that we're on the same page. It took about 2 days into the process of talking to other people and inviting them to write to discover that we actually have fundamental disagreements about what prayer is. There's a midrash in Sifri that says that there's 10 languages of prayers, 10 forms of prayers. I would say that in this book, there's at least 55. This is the number of writers.
Yeah.
And in fact, I probably would argue that even the same writer sometimes uses different mediums in understanding what prayer is. We had to come up with some sort of umbrella definition for ourselves to define what goes in and what doesn't go in. And the best definition we came with really through the process as we were honing it together with a lot of trial and error was that prayer, first of all, is directed at someone. There's an addressee, God, the divine being, higher power. But even more importantly, prayer means that we're not just giving an account of where we're at, our present moment or our past. Prayer requires or involves looking at where we want to be on some level. And it can be very minor. It can be very, very small. But there is something future-oriented about prayer and allowing ourselves to imagine. So what we asked our writers after figuring it out is to include those elements, but also to try and write from a personal place, but words that are generalizable. Meaning, if somebody writes something that's so particular to them that nobody else can pick up and pray from it, then it doesn't belong in this book, because this is a book that people are supposed to be able to, as Shira always says, recite from, not just read from. And I'll say one last thing. We made one exception. One exception. Leah Jackman, whose son fell in battle, included a quote from his personal diary that he wrote before going into Gaza in her prayer. And we sat with it, and we didn't know what to do with it because it's not generalizable. These are his words, and it's very distinct. And it's clear that it somehow doesn't belong in the work as a whole. But after sitting with it, we said, this is her truth right now. And even if we can't recite these words, first of all, let's hope we never can, because none of us want to find ourselves praying over a dead child. But we will honor where she's at and what she sacrificed, and we will allow it. But this is really the exception.
There are no barriers. The flow between Tefillah and Shira and Tefillah has always been part of the Jewish text and discourse. In this particular case, one of the classical for me, oftentimes, I don't remember now if it's in a conservative or reform Siddur, but a poem by Leah Goldberg is included, which starts with the word, Lamdeni Elohai barech ve'itpalel, teach me, O Lord, to pray. And most people, like in Siddurim, you don't write the name of the poet, so people call it the Lamdeni. And they have no idea that it was written by a modern woman poet in Israel. So that happens all along. I think that a good part of your tefillot could find place in the poetry book, and quite a few of the poems here can take the shape of tefillah. But I'd like to do that with a qualification. If you will allow the fact that we extend tefillah into different formats of discourse with that addressee to tochecha. Quite a few of the poems here address the divine with tochecha, with argument, with anger, with disappointment. So tefillah needs to be extended into a larger discourse with the divine. It's not the annihilation of faith. Faith is there because they continue to talk to him and to ask for answers, but it's not exactly gratitude and it's not exactly requests. It's more like tochecha.
I want to say that a lot of our prayers also, and Az Nashir, include an element of that as well. Mm-hmm. And we had to make an editorial decision about it, and we decided to allow it. Because it's true. Yeah. Because coming out of October 7th without some level of anger, I mean, I know there are people who did, but for me personally would feel false. And we are a faith, a people who could handle Abraham haggling with God over Sodom and could handle Job. Moshe over and over again, demanding that God change his verdict. We can handle people today feeling anger, feeling resentment, feeling doubt. And as long as it is in that format of conversation, then if anything, it's a testament to the strength of our relationship with God, because as my friend who's a couples therapist says, couples with problems don't argue because they don't know if they can survive the argument. So the tochacha, to me, is a testament to how long of a journey we took and how long and strong it will, God willing, continue to be.
I want to ask each of you to look back at your own particular genres to explore how new it is what you're doing. You mentioned in the introduction, Rachel Danziger, about the history of techinas, of techinot by women. How do you connect it with that? And you've taught Rachel Korazim the poetry of war poetry. And so in what ways are your respective projects continuous with those that preceded it, and in what ways is this new?
Shall I go
Sure.
first? I'll take it from the chronology of what I have done and sort of think about it backwards, because it was an initiative. So October 7th is October 7th. I'm in Budapest, no way to come home. We are not a priority, being 78, Yossi and I. El Al will not take us on the first seats. And so we get home by October 17th. I was scheduled to teach a class around the 20th for my regular Thursday night, now Wednesday classes. I had a whole plan for the whole semester. I realized none of this is going to work. I was not yet ready. I felt scared of the choices. What to do with this raw, painful material? Do I have to exercise now poetic criteria to make sure it's good enough poetry, or is the sentiment? So I took myself back to a safer place. And the first session I offered, there is Mona here who participated, I think, in that one, was going back to poetic reactions in previous historical events of major tragedy. And we went to Bialik after the Kishinev pogrom, and we went to post-Holocaust poetry. We even had on Tisha B'Av, if you may remember, a whole session on Baruch Mimagenza by Chernichovsky for the massacres of the First Crusade. I went to the safe ground. I wanted to sort of plant myself in the language of poetic response to major disaster. And only after that, slowly, I started collecting and reassuring myself. So if I made a mistake and this one is not a keeper, malasot, I will probably not live long enough to know what will stay and what will remain as a keeper. The responsibility is heavy, and I needed the support of Kadia Molodovsky, of Chaim Nachman Bialik, of Shaul Chernichovsky, Dan Pagis, as they write after major tragedy, to give me some grounding. This is how I went about it.
I think that I can relate, and I think it's part of a bigger trend post-October 7th. I can just, since you shared your personal October 7th story, I'll say that for me, October 7th really landed around 8:30 in the morning of Simchat Torah, because I was in Jerusalem happily oblivious about what's going on down south before that. After the first siren, after I ran with my little kids down, I helped a neighbor, and started hearing my non-Shabbat observant neighbors talking and saying things that sounding fantastical and impossible, and now we know we're just a sliver of what reality really was. And I started, forgive me, I started losing myself. I felt like I'm losing who I am. It was Simchat Torah, it's when we read about the creation of the world. I felt my world was being unmade all of a sudden and all at once. And in order to find myself and find a sense of agency and a sense of choice and freedom and ability to put one foot in front of the other in this fog, I needed to connect myself to something bigger than myself. And to some extent, it was my role as a parent, because my kids were there and I couldn't fall apart right in front of them and scar them for life with this memory. And my community was there to hold me in shul. We did go to shul. It's a minute from our house, and I wanted to be with other people. And tradition did it. And that's what you're talking about, right? It's about rooting yourself in tradition. Interestingly, for the prayer project, which was a while after that, we were already in a different place, the tradition we rooted ourselves in doesn't have big names like Dan Pagis and Shaul Chernichovsky. It's mostly anonymous women throughout, Ashkenaz for sure, Babylon, Galut Sfarad, who wrote prayers about their personal lives and intimate experiences. And we have some of their names, but we know very little about their lives. They never reached the celebrity status of these poets. And their prayers, some survived, some didn't survive. It was transient, much of it was oral. And yet, there was something about this minor key of it all that felt very comforting to me. That we are joining a tradition that is so deep and so vital that it doesn't only exist in these glorious moments, of somebody finding perfect words. It's something people just did as part of life. Women, also men, but women primarily, just did. This was their bread and butter. This was their breathing in, breathing out. It was praying. And there was something very grounding and very comforting in making room for ourselves in this tradition, where I think we did go beyond that. Really stems from the fact that our lives are so different from the lives of those women. Those women wrote about challah and mikveh and pregnancy, mostly domestic matters, because this was their life, both as modern women and as Israelis with an army, with a share in the civil, pie and responsibilities. The intimate textures of our life changed, and the prayers in the book address that, meaning we continue the tradition of writing about our personal lives, but our personal lives, I'm grateful to say, are much more expansive and much more interconnected with the global world. So I think that's where it differs.
I know that Rachel Korazim wants to invite you, Rachel Sharansky Danziger, to share one of your poems in her book. But just as you're flipping to the page, I wondered if you could just, as an extension of what you just shared, just a word about the gendered nature of this project. Yours is the work that's gendered.
Yes, correct.
But I'll say that, I think certainly for me, and I imagine for many men, these are incredibly meaningful prayers. And I felt my own, I told you when we met about the project, about the book, about this evening, many of these prayers helped to enhance my own experience of the Chagim this year, and I'm really grateful for that. And how do you think about this in terms of for women, by women, or by women, for women, and friends of women?
Allies.
Allies of
People who are comfortable allowing God to edit the gender on the receiving end. Look, the three of us are Orthodox women. Most of the writers are people in our immediate circle. So most of them are praying women somewhere within the, Orthodox conservative reform is just not an Israeli category so much. So, but within the observant Dati world, and here in Israel, somewhere on the spectrum, like not all, and not in the same way. And I can say that for religious women, the experience of prayer is different than for religious men. And I know here in Pardes, it's no longer true necessarily, but in the kind of shuls we pray in, our role in shul is just not the same. And what shul has to offer us is not the same. And even if we ourselves go to partnership minions, or if we're part of the change that's overtaking the scene now, our tradition and how we were conditioned and the kind of stories we heard stem from that older tradition of the separation of genders. And not separation just as something that's forced on you, but the separation as something that shapes who you are. So we wanted to give room for women to share their voice in prayer, not because we don't think men have something valuable to say. And to all the men here, we love you, you're wonderful. We have nothing against you, but we wanted to let women share their experience and create their own space, in a sense. And I'll say one last thing, which is my husband, for example, goes to shul almost every day. Many men I know within the religious community go to shul very regularly. Women go less, usually. And many women experience a sense of loneliness in this war. And part of the idea behind the project was to mitigate that, to create a community of women praying together, even if they're not occupying the same physical space. So it's almost like we're creating a shul for women a portable shul for women in the form of a book.
Shall we say the background?
Yes.
So I'm out there looking for poetry, not on bookshelves, not in libraries, not in bookstores, in the digital world, Facebook and other places. And I think we were friends already on Facebook because of our connection through Pardes. And I find Rachel's page, and to me, there is a poem. So I have a routine, already a text that I know by heart. Reintroduce myself, I didn't have to introduce myself. I send a message. I teach contemporary Israeli poetry online to audiences worldwide. Do I have your permission to use your poem in one of my upcoming classes and also to translate into English? And I get back the answer that says,
What poem?
what poem? And I said, the one you posted on Facebook this morning. And she said it was a Facebook post. It wasn't a poem. Would you read it? And then I'd like to, if I'm allowed, I ask for permission to show you what makes it a poem.
Should I read in Hebrew or English?
Whichever, I will complete the other.
Could you read it in both?
I'll read in Hebrew and Rachel.
בסדר.
Okay. ביום אפשר לאפות עוגיות לנשות המילואימניקים. ביום אפשר לשלוח הודעות מחזקות לחברים. ביום אפשר לנחם אבלים. ביום אפשר להשקיע בחיים. אבל בשעות הלילה אין איך להשתיק את המתים. אני שוכבת וליבי ער, ער ודוהר, רודף אחרי שברי סיפורים שסופם כבר ידוע, והכל, הכל, הכל מרגיש פצוע, פגוע, ואיך אפשר לישון ואיך אפשר לשקוט, כשאיבדנו לנצח יותר מ1,000 לבבות.
By day. By day one can bake cookies for the wives of the reservists. By day one can send strengthening messages to friends. By day one can comfort mourners. By day one can invest in life. But at night, there is no way to silence the dead. I lie down and my heart is awake, awake and galloping, chasing fragments of stories whose endings are well known, and everything, everything, everything hurts and feels wounded, injured, damaged. And how can one sleep and how can one be tranquil when we have lost for eternity more than 1,000 hearts? Can I show you what makes this a poem? And everybody else.
Yes.
It was in Ivrit on Facebook. I asked for permission to translate. If there is time enough, I'll explain about a glitch, an issue in the translation. This was the last editing element in the book before it went to publishing, because we changed something a day before it went to the print, with Rachel's permission. The poem has two very clear parts, the day and night part, which in itself already is the poetic notion of creation, the separation between day and night. And the first is like almost the sense of the Karev Yom, Bayom, 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 during the day. And if you have been there or even out of Israel, the frenzy of trying to do something and another thing and another thing, first of all, to keep busy, because otherwise you'll go nuts, and then because so much was needed to be done. So that keeps you during the day. The frenzy, rather than pulling you apart, keeps you together. And then comes that poetic switch with the word aval. So much part of Hebrew poetry, the ve'ulai, the ach, aval, oftentimes switches the tone, and we come to the night, and this is where real magic happens, in contradiction to the first part. But at night there is no way to silence the dead. Like, seriously? One of the best known qualities of the dead is that they are quiet. And as soon as you create that line, you're doing poetry, because it's not reality you are describing, it's something of your heart. That sense that the dead are crying, yelling in your mind, not in reality. Dead people not do not need to be silenced. They're dead. But in your poetic expression, they do. And immediately with that, you go to Shir HaShirim. אני ישנה וליבי ער, אני שוכבת וליבי ער. And whether you want to treat Shir HaShirim and the most erotic Hebrew text ever written, or the symbolic connection and love between the divine and the people of Israel, it doesn't matter. It's all about love and longing and following the beloved one. And the heart in this case is totally the reverse. It's not following the lover. It's chasing stories that you have already heard 6 times today, and you cannot stop listening to them time and again. And then comes that line, because we are into the love story of Shir HaShirim, and we come to the Hakol, 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 and I look at it, and I hear Ve'ahavta. בכל נפשך ובכל לבבך ובכל מאודיך. Not only are the dead gone, not only Shir HaShirim now acquires a new meaning, but that basic daily prayer following the Shema Ve'ahavta is broken. And here, friends, in English, the everything, everything, everything doesn't do justice. The Hakol, Hakol, Hakol. Sometimes you pay a price in translation, so you need to learn Hebrew. ואיך אפשר לישון, and how can you sleep, and how can you be tranquil when we have lost for all eternity 1,000 hearts? So we are back to the heart that is awake. We are back to the heart that cannot pray, but also in times that will come much later, many of these poems have clues of the time they were written. When Rachel says more than 1,000, she doesn't know the number yet. It's early. And readers of critiques later will be looking and tiptoeing to see the chronology of this poetry. Mm-hmm. Thank you for this gift.
Thank you for the gift of giving it to me, of making me see it with different eyes. I can say that I wrote it really, like, as you said, very, very soon after. I don't remember, a week or 2 after
Something
October
like
7th. In those days when I felt like I will never sleep again.
Mm-hmm.
And it was this bizarre feeling when it felt like nobody is asleep. Like nobody, everybody is awake, everybody. That's why I wanted to write Ani Yeshena V'Libi Or, but I couldn't.
Yeah.
Like the other references I can't claim to have done on purpose, but this I did do on purpose, the Ani
But you
Yeshena
couldn't,
V'Libi Or, and I couldn't
not
write it.
Yeshena, of course.
It was a lie.
Yeah.
It would have been a lie, because it was such a heavy time.
Another question, and then we'll soon open it up for your questions. Both books are very cognizant of both the Hebrew reader and the English reader. Both seem like projects that are in a moment of solidarity, really uniting Israel and the diaspora. I wanted to ask you a little bit about your reflections on that, in which this circle of solidarity, which was one of the most appealing and seductive outcomes of October 7th, manifests itself in this Jewish solidarity between English speakers and Hebrew speakers. And how much, like the example that we just played with, is sort of lost in translation. You know, one might not pick up the Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs reference in the poem that you read.
Well, this is my life, Leon. This is what I do. So this is not new to me, and I do not do it alone. And this is the moment to really mention the 2 amazing people. One on the West Coast, Heather Silverman, a teacher of English. The other from Boston, and a friend of yours, Michael Bonin, a friend of many years, who received from me a basic, raw translation of what the poem says. And then Michael is your scholar who will pick up all the references. I'm good with the biblical ones. being the product of the Israeli secular education system, I know Tanakh. But Michael has the Midrash, and Michael has the Mishnah and the Gemara, and then I come with the modern poetry. So he does that. And Heather is the one who will make sure that it will sound like a poem in English. But oftentimes there are difficulties, and I would like to illustrate with one, if you will allow me. So if you hold the book, go to page 58, 59. And those who do not own a book and want to borrow a copy and then return it, you don't have to buy them. If you want to pick up a copy and look at it as we are reading, that's 100% kosher by everybody. Homefront Command New Regulations for Small Talk. We are on page 59 for the English and 58 for the Ivrit. Oftentimes, all the time when I teach, I always, it's my minhag, I start with reading the Hebrew original. And God forbid somebody should refer to the Hebrew version in my classes. The Hebrew is not a version. The English is a version. The Hebrew is the poem. But in this particular poem, I wanted, in every single time I taught this poem, and many a time, by Lital Kaplan, I started with the English title, wanting to make sure of something that I want to make sure you get as well. Homefront Command New Regulations for Small Talk. Do you realize this is tongue-in-cheek? That Homefront Command does not really tell us how to talk? This is a response to all those regulations, gather, not gather, go, stay 10 minutes, cover your head. And the reaction of the poet, who is a social worker by trade, by the way, doesn't see herself as a poet, is, well, guys, if you are so smart, will you please tell me how to talk? Because I've lost my language. הנחיות פיקוד העורף לשיחת חולין. מה נשמע? בוטל. ובמקומו נשאל, מה נשמת? מה נשבר? מה נשאר? מה קורה נאסר? ובמקומו נתהה מה קורס? מה נקבר? ובמקום מה שלומך חצוף נגדיר פנים מול חברנו ונשאל, מה מלחמתך? I'll stop here because I want to illustrate some of the difficulty. The translation here is not ours, is by somebody else that Lital had chosen. What's up cancelled? Instead use what's shaken up, what's beaten up, what's blown up. What's going on banned? Alternatives, what's breaking down? What's forever gone? Instead of the rude, how are you? We must frown in the face of our friend and ask, how were you? This is where I want to illustrate issues. Asking somebody, how are you, is a basic token of politeness. We use it at the beginning of an email, a phone conversation, meeting somebody on the street, honestly, oftentimes hoping the person will not really respond. It's like a figure of speech, of nimus, of politeness. What needs to happen in a society for that to turn not cancelled, not banned, but rude, the opposite. For that you need the essence of the meaning of the expression ma shlomcha, ma shlomech, which is not how are you. In it is the word shalom. The classical Hebrew is asking, Hashalom lecha, is there peace with you? Are you at peace? In it there's also that additional meaning of shalem, whole. Are you together? Are you whole? Now could you honestly turn to a person in Israel nowadays assuming they are whole? Could you honestly ask somebody, are you at peace? So actually, that which used to be until October 7th an expression of politeness had turned rude. I need 15 minutes in every class to illustrate what this happens. The translation cannot do it. So this was just one of the many such illustrations, but we struggle to bring it as close as we can, and oftentimes with footnotes to explain.
Thank you. Rachel Danziger, you indicate in the book which the original language was. How do you relate to this issue of diaspora, Israel, English, Hebrew?
So I should say that in a way this project started as a project for the Anglo community in Israel. And we expanded it to be for all Israel, like all the writers are Israelis. And the primary use, as far as we're concerned, is internal to Israel, because these are prayers that have to do with the intimate aspects, all the different textures of our daily lives. You know, some of them can be used elsewhere, but running to the bomb shelter, to a prayer for when your kids are going through a panic attack in the bomb shelter, I'll be honest, most places in the world, I mean, maybe Ukraine right now, but most places in the world, the Jewish community is not dealing with them. And so our first goal was very much inwards facing. That said, it's not a mistake that we included both languages for each prayer. And in a sense here, I do think it's versions, because here the language is less important to us than the function. Mm-hmm. And we wanted the function, the prayer, to bridge between Anglos and non-Anglos here, but also between us and Jews everywhere, because we think we're one people, and we want everyone to use the words that matter to them, that feel relevant, but also to understand us better, to come into the conversation from a place of understanding and knowledge that goes much deeper than seeing the news and kind of how it's seen from the outside. The prayers give everyone reading them, I think, a window into how we experience our time here. I want to say one more thing about the translation process. I did some of the translation, but most of the translation was done by a wonderful team of translators we brought in, Juliana Brown, and she brought her own helpers. And they worked on it, and I worked on it, and the whole thing felt like we're putting together a plane that we're already halfway to boarding, because we started putting it together after Pesach, and it came out before Rosh Hashanah, and it just kept swelling up, and it was just insane. But in this process, we learned a lot about the translation process as a cultural process. And I'll give an example. I feel like talking about it in generalities is vague. Tehillah Friedman, former MK Tehillah Friedman, wrote an angry poem, a prayer, full of doubt and tochacha to Hashem, full of rebuke to God. And she used fragmentary style. Like her sentences sometimes don't have verbs or don't have subjects, and they're terse, and they're angry. And in Hebrew, it works. You read it, and you know better than me that Hebrew poetry is often terse, because the way we use words means we don't need a lot of them.
For Bayom, you have to say during the day in English.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but it works. As a Hebrew reader, I read it, and what I get from it is, here is a person in a state of emotional distress who is upset and doesn't know how to handle God's apparent hester panim, hiding of the face, but is still coming at it from a place of faith. When we translated it literally, word by word, an English reader reading it, reading it from putting my English hat on and reading it, it landed totally differently. It landed as this extremely angry prayer that is basically the equivalent of a divorce, because English is not a terse language in the same way. When you use a 3-word sentence in English, it sounds angry in a way that the same doesn't sound in Hebrew. So we read it and we said, this is not what she meant. We don't care that it's correct from translation perspective. The point of it is it's supposed to be prayer, and this is a prayer that conveys something totally different. So we rounded up the sentences. The English sentences are complete, are long, full sentences where we tried to make the meaning clearer within the cultural norms of English. And I have to tell you, since we did everything with the help of professionals, but this project is all self-made in a sense between Shira, myself, and Anne, dealing with a pagination for a Hebrew text and an English text, where the Hebrew text is terse on purpose and the English text is rounded up, was a nightmare I don't wish upon my worst enemies. But that's what we had to do. That's what we had to do.
Just before we open it up, I want you to share, Rachel Korazim, the story behind Rachel Goldberg's poem. Rachel is really, and her family, Rachel and John, are part of the Pardes extended family. Rachel was actually a student at Pardes when I was
My
a
classes.
student, 95, 96, no, in the
Ah,
year
back in the
program,
day, yeah.
and then a student in your classes. Rachel was working here at Pardes on October 7th. And we were absolutely heartbroken, along with everyone else, when we learned of Hirsch's death, Zichrono Livracha. So share that story with us, please.
So just like you have the exception with the quote from the Dead Soldier's Diary, we have one exception, and that's Rachel Goldberg Pauline's poem. It wasn't written in Hebrew. It was written in English. That's the only one, and translated back into Hebrew. I did a translation which Rachel did not like, and she preferred another. So obviously we included the one she preferred. At the time it was written, at the time the book was published, we all were still hoping for Hirsch to come back one day. Beyond the publication in America, we also opted to do a printing here in Israel. Being where we are, I opted for a printing shop in the periphery up north, the ones that were active, to give them some work. And it was a whole to-do to get the material. And I was getting ready to get the first 200 copies from the print shop near Afula at my home. And meanwhile, all the people, like you did, whose poems are in the book, got a free copy. So I got my granddaughter Shira, my oldest one, to help me with the logistics of preparing the envelopes. And I had an envelope with Rachel's home address here in Jerusalem to deliver the book to. The day before I got the books, we were notified that Hirsch was killed with the other 5. And on the day the package came, they were already sitting Shiva. Package arrives to my home, 200 books. For the first time, I hold Shiva in my hand after 6 months of work. All the other copies, like Mona had a copy before I did in America. And I'm very emotional, a little bit weepy. And Yossi very carefully is a social worker. Do you want, he didn't say celebrate. He knew it wasn't the word. And said, do you want to do something? And then I looked at him and I said, yes. Want for us to get into the car and take the first copy printed in Israel to the Shiva. Deborah helped me not to stand in line for 3 hours. And we were just for a minute. So the first copy published in Israel was given to Rachel Pauline Goldberg and to the family. That's the story around it. That was my marking the day.
Thank you, Rachel. Let's take, yeah,
I
please.
just want to,
Sure.
it's hard to follow up on that story. I was in that Shiva also. I didn't try to go in. I just was there for prayer, for prayers. In the morning, I felt like they don't know me, I don't know them, but I wanted to join them in prayer. And I mean, that day, the day that the news about Hirsch and Carmel Gat and the others came out, was one of the hardest days, I think, of the war for so many of us, because it felt so, I mean, everything feels unfair now, but I just felt like it should have had a different ending. And I want to say that when we started working on this book, we had this thought, oh, what will we do if by the time it's ready, the war will be over and it'll be irrelevant? And then we turned around to each other and said, let's hope.
Alevai.
Alevai.
Alevai, it should be obsolete, yeah.
But we said, may it become a primary source for learning about the past. May it be dead on arrival, in a sense. We hoped that it'll be dead on arrival.
Better.
But it wasn't. And the work we put into praying our own prayers and soliciting and collecting other women's prayers, and I felt like it helped us build certain muscles in the soul. Because it forced us over and over again to look at the worst that reality has in it, and there's a lot of bad in it now, and find it in ourselves to look up and say, and yet what do we hope for? And I worked here with a prayer of Talia Haber, who lost her husband in battle, and Leah Jackman, who lost her son in battle. It's not my pain, but working with it, editing, translating it, required going through it. And I felt like, I don't know what I would have done in that horrible day in the beginning of September, when you have to smile at your kids and send them to school where you're devastated and destroyed inside, if I hadn't had those muscles. And I wanted, before we open it, if I may, I wanted to call on my partner, Shir Lankin Sheps, to share one of her prayers that I keep coming back to and that helps me find that muscle, that hopeful muscle in myself, her prayer for stillness.
I just want to say that that was such a fascinating listening to Rachel and Rachel speak about these books, hearing about Shiva for so many months through Rachel, and just listening to my Rachel talk about all of the things that we have experienced all of these months. It's really not been that long, and I think my neck is going to be sore tomorrow just from nodding in agreement along with everybody. But just want to thank you both for this really beautiful evening, because I know how deeply words pierce the soul and impact. And, these books are gifts to the world, and there's so many people behind them. And just listening to the two of you talk about it, it was extraordinary, and I really tremendously enjoyed it.
Thank you, Shira. I'm actually having a hard time finding it. It's too big of a book. Thank you. Thank you. It's too big of a book.
Yeah, it's an immense book. It was supposed to be about 100 pages.
That's patience.
We thought it would maybe be 40 tefillot. By the end, it was 560 pages and 55. Me? Oh, I wrote in English. I'll read it in English as well. So this is my prayer for patience. Avinu Shabashamayim. I know that in your expanse, time moves at a different pace. In the smallness of the human experience, we cannot begin to see our lives through your eyes. Our mountains are specks of dust in your celestial landscape. Our oceans are droplets in the seas of your universes. Our struggles are surely list items in your great book of who will live and who will die. In the mysteries of your grand tapestry, threads woven and knotted, loosened and pulled tight, a masterpiece of cause and effect that in the limits of our human understanding we cannot see. We watch chess pieces move across the board, empires rise and fall, ideas rot from the inside, morality turn itself into mockery, and our hands search for purchase as a flood comes through once more. Waiting and watching has become unbearable. Our nights are tunneled into darkness, airless and sour, dreams drenched in violence. We sleep on the edge of despair. Going to sleep with empty beds at home, waking to blood-soaked pillows. We open our eyes in the mornings, fearful of what the day might bring. So please, bless us with patience. To ride the waves of this storm, sure of reaching the safety of the shore. Bless us with the gift of understanding. Give us a glimpse of what you mean, of the wonders you have planned. Fortify us with faith, that the flooding will stop and the dove will come home to roost in peace. Plant within us the truth. Let us feel carried and comforted while you reshape the world once more. Bless us with the patience to wait, for our prayers to be answered, for our people all to return home, for the redemption you promised when you flooded the skies with colors that whispered, never again.
Amen.
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 Amen. Thank you so much. We have time for a couple of questions, and then I think I'm going to ask Rachel Korazim to conclude with one more poem from the book. Yeah, please.
I don't know who you are, but I'm getting a very full picture that your writing has spanned decades, I assume. You've been through other Israeli wars. What sparked this godly kind of project that you would create such a book for this war?
None of it was of my planning. First of all, I was born here before the state was born.
Right.
I lived through all of Israel's wars. I have never written one poetic line in my life. I am only a reader, a teacher, a collector of these poems. I did not plan this to happen. I didn't expect October 7th to happen.
Right.
It dawned on me or dropped on me, or the catastrophe came like all of us. I'm the daughter of Holocaust survivors who came here not expecting for it to be easy, but never expecting for it to become an unsafe place for Jews to stand helpless again. If you want to understand where I am, the one sentence I can share between my sister and myself, daughter of the same survivors, is every single time we meet and part since, we repeat the sentence, Toda La'el she'iba beta.
Yeah.
Toda La'el she'iba beta.
Yeah.
Thank God that our mother, the Holocaust survivor, who came to these shores hopeful, pregnant with me, to create a safe haven, did not live to see this.
Wow.
This is where I am. I did not plan this project. It happened to me in Budapest, listening to a rabbi in New York, and then starting to collect. And then sometimes along the way offering a session to yet another community. The rabbi there, also a Reform rabbi, Rabbi Jeff Salkin, said, Rachel, I know a publisher who might be interested in doing an anthology of that. That publisher never came through. He didn't think it was worthwhile doing bilingual. And Michael Bonin found another publishing house. And with the help of students in my class, we got this published so that all income can go to the Israeli Trauma Coalition. And there's one couple representative of that group of hundreds of people who came together to make this happen. No credit comes to my initiative. It's a community effort. It was given to me, and I was lucky enough to see when it was given and to pick it up. This is the only thing I can say.
It's an amazing shlichut. Thank you.
I want to thank you for this incredibly rich evening, for Pardes for hosting it. Rachel Korazim, you're my teacher par excellence since the beginning of COVID. And Rachel Sharansky Danziger, you're a new discovery, even before the book, which I look forward to reading. And your interview with Rachel Goldberg, Poland, and Rachel Goldberg were incredible. And it's relevant here because I think the two of you bring a woman's voice, a woman's heart, in a way that is extraordinary. And you give voice to the things that we're all struggling with. I also want to just say, Rachel Danziger, that you talked about how do I protect my children and not freak out. Anna Freud, Sigmund Freud's daughter, did a study of children and their mothers who were in the underground during the Blitz of London, and how the kids did. And the kids whose mothers didn't freak out did just fine, despite the trauma. And the kids whose mothers freaked out did not do fine. And I feel like, you're giving chizuk to the mothers and the fathers of Amcha to navigate with greater wisdom and to give voice to what is so painful, so that we can protect our children the best we can and protect ourselves. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
Having to choose one of the 59 poems in this collection, my choice, in most cases when I'm asked to do that, go to one poem. I found it on the internet in those early days, and as I told you, I sent this message, and in that message there is also my email address and my phone number. And practically a minute after I hit send, the man called me. I live. And he says, "Who are you? What do you want with my poem?" And I said, "I want to understand where it's coming from and who you are." And then he started talking and couldn't stop. I will not tell you what he said. He was driving. His poem, Ima Tamid Tzodeket, on pages 16 and 17, are a response to what I call, it's just a Rachel Korazim term, the intergenerational Israeli lie, where our parents promised us that by the time we grow up, and then we said the same to our kids, and I think my kids stopped saying that to my grandchildren who are now in the military. This poem, Itai, who is a musician, who is a conductor of choirs, had placed not in his own voice, but in a voice of a child. Poets do that sometimes, replace the poetic voice. We'll go with both languages, Ivrit first. אמא תמיד צודקת. אמא אמרה שעד שאגדל כבר לא יהיה צבא. אמא צדקה. עוד לא גדלתי וכבר לא היה צבא. הוא לא היה כששמעתי צעקות בחוץ. הוא לא היה כשראיתי את אבא כל כך מפוחד ולחוץ. הוא לא היה כשדלת הבית נפרצה בביתה. הוא לא היה כשהתחבאתי מתחת למיטה. הוא לא היה כשהדפנו שלושתנו את דלת הממ"ד. הוא לא היה כשהזמן פשוט עמד. הוא לא היה כשהם נכנסו פתאום פנימה. הוא לא היה כשהם קראו את אבא מאמא. אמא אמרה שעד שאגדל כבר לא יהיה צבא. אמא צדקה. ועכשיו רק רציתי להגיד לה שהיא תמיד צודקת. בכיתי, צעקתי, והיא עדיין שותקת. Mom is always right. Mom said that when I grow up, there will be no army. Mom was right. I haven't yet grown up, and already there was no army. It wasn't there when I heard the screaming outside. It wasn't there when I saw Dad so scared and stressed. It wasn't there when the door was kicked. It wasn't there when I hid under the bed. It wasn't there when we three pushed back on the door of the safe room. It wasn't there when time just stood still. It wasn't there when they suddenly entered. It wasn't there when they tore Dad from Mom. Mom said that when I grow up, there will be no army. Mom was right. Now I only want to tell her that she is always right. I've cried, I've screamed, and still she is silent. I live. Do I have 2 minutes to tell his story?
Sure.
He told it to me on the phone as he was trying to pick one of his 4 children from a karate class. He told me, Rachel, then it was 4 years ago, now it's 5. I lost a child to cancer. We tried here in Israel, it didn't work out. We went to America and he died there. He was 9. His name was Rave, of blessed memory. I used to write poetry as long as Rave was alive, and once he died, I couldn't. And then October 7th, realizing what is happening to Israeli children these days, I refound my voice. This is Rave of blessed memory, who did not live long enough for October 7th, but lended his voice to the terrible realization that everything we promised our children could not be delivered.
Thank you, Rachel. We're going to conclude with one of the tefillot, one of the prayers. Rachel Danziger.
Thank you. I want to go to a prayer I wrote on page 313, a prayer for focus. I want to say why I chose it. This poem by Tai takes me back to those, also my own Facebook post/poem takes me back to the horrors of the first few weeks. And the flavor of horror changed over time, but it's been horrible all along. Meaning we got used to some things, we hardened our hearts to some things in order to be able to go on, but then other things, happened. Like we barely got over October 7th, and then we started having Hutar lePirsum, released for publication names, and we just lived through so many flavors of horror, and the challenges at every stage changed. For friends whose husbands were in the reserves duty, the challenges when he's home and when he's not home are not the same. The challenges when his unit is in Gaza or Lebanon and she can't call him, and the challenges when he's on base are not the same. But throughout all those different stages, I kept reminding myself that at every given moment, I don't control all of it. I can't be the army that shows up and delivers all those promises. I can't single-handedly defeat Hamas and Hezbollah. Do I wish I could? Yes, very much so. But no, I can't go into the tunnels and drag our hostages back into their families' embrace. I can't. But at every given time, no matter what the flavor of horror is, no matter how hard things are, I can make a choice to focus on what is in my hands to do and do that. And in order to do that, it means not just connecting to the big story, finding meaning, finding tradition, like we said in the beginning. Sometimes it means actually looking down, focusing in, letting go of the news, of the horror, of the terror, and finding a sense of agency in something small. And I wrote this really as a meditation for myself, to remind myself to make that choice, to focus on what is in my hand, to find liberty in it. I'll read it in Hebrew, which is a language I wrote it originally in, and then I'll read the English. Eli, בימים שבהם אני מתפתה להביט מסביב בעיניים חוששות, ומרשה לליבי לרבות פחד, עזור לי להביט על אהוביי ולזכור את שנתון בידיי, לעודד, לתמוך, לחבק, להקשיב, לזרוע זירי עידוד קטנים בלבבות. זהו, זה בידיי. עזור לי לזרוע את מה שעליי לזרוע, ולהפקיד את כל השאר בידיך. My God, on the days in which I am tempted to gaze round with weary eyes and allow my heart to fill with fear, help me to look at my loved ones and recall what is in my hands to control, to encourage, to support, to embrace, to listen, to sow little seeds of encouragement in beating hearts. That's all. This is what is in my hands to do. Help me to plant what I am meant to plant and leave all that remains in your hands.
Amen.
Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Rachel Korazim and Rachel Sharansky Danziger.
Thank you, Leon.